Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Hello, and thank you for listening, whether it's on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, wherever you podcast. Later in the show, Dr. Genevieve Gunther, author of the book, The Language of Climate Politics. I don't know what we're going to talk about, but we'll have something to talk about, I'm sure, by the time I get to her. First up, though, however, is Executive Director of Georgia Equality, friend of the show, Jeff Graham. Jeff, how are you? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well, Ron, and, doing as well as can be expected these days.
I was marveling a little bit before we got on the air here. Thank you for the siren going by. It's always when I'm recording. That you guys had a really strong turnout for the first day of the legislative session at the Georgia General Assembly at the state capitol. I'm pretty impressed by that. And you guys had a quick turnaround to do that, too.
Yeah. We had decided we were going to do this kind of towards the end of December. But all of the organizations were shut down, so we really couldn't devote any staff resources to getting the word out until everybody was back on January 6th. So I was incredibly pleased. And I think thank you for saying us, but it's really the people that showed up. And I think it shows that in this political environment, people are ready to stand up, people are ready to show up, and people are ready to fight, not just for their individual rights, but really prioritizing the rights of the transgender community. And that's why we wanted to do this on day one of the legislative session. We know that trans folks have been stigmatized, lied about in 2024, and actually going back several years now. Yeah. And we wanted all trans folks in Georgia to know that they have strong allies in the community, down at the legislature, a small army of people that is committed to having their back and committed to doing our best to fight against the onslaught of bad legislation that I'm afraid is coming.
So I read on yesterday's show an article or an op-ed that Jay Bookman at the Georgia Recorder penned. I don't know if you've had a chance to read that, but he spoke a little bit about Republicans' fixation on trans participation in sports and which bathrooms they use, et cetera, and so on. And he wrote, "Why so much attention to an issue that affects almost nobody?" He said, because transgender Americans are an unpopular, powerless, and almost friendless subgroup, which makes them the perfect target for politicians willing to leverage that unpopularity into votes. And when I read that yesterday, I had to pause because it really hurt. It really hurt to know that such a small subset of our population is literally just being bullied because it's good for the politician to do the bullying. And it reminded me of what it was like as a kid on the margins in middle school and high school to watch as the unpopular, powerless, and almost friendless, a target of bullying in those grades would be affected by bullies in grade school simply because it somehow made the bully more popular. And that's really no different, I don't think, than what we're seeing from a political movement now. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, it is absolutely bullying. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that the bullies don't win, that the bullies are exposed for exactly who and what they are. And that is bullies. And I don't disagree with Jay's assessment, but I really disagree with how he phrased some of the stuff. And that's why we did this rally. Transgender folks are not friendless.
Agreed.
They are not helpless. They are not without power. But it is small numbers. Frankly, LGBT community across the board is small numbers.
Right.
And but we've always been able to find success, one, by coming together and creating community, two, making sure we have each other's backs, to find that sense of resiliency and resistance. And frankly, in this moment in time, it has to be around joy, finding the joy in your gender identity, finding joy in being transgender. I look back to my early days as an AIDS activist, and one of the strong messages we put out is encouraging people living with HIV and AIDS to be public about their HIV status. And it's not safe for all transgender folks to be public, and we understand that.
Right.
But it is important that transgender folks not cave to this narrative that has been thrust upon them. And that's how we will eventually change hearts and minds. And that's just, unfortunately, the work we have to do over the next couple of years.
It's not even just a vilifying of the conservative right. There is work to be done in the center and in the left as well.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure you've learned that. In reading Jay Bookman's piece, he also spoke to a capitulation of sorts in understanding that, measures have to be made and baby steps. He spoke of Bill Clinton and, finding common ground or some middle ground with Don't Ask, Don't Tell before the elimination of the gay service ban. We'll likely deal with a transgender service ban as well here in the near future as well, but that's another story. But he spoke about measures and that maybe the participation in sports is some sort of common ground. I'm sure you would disagree with even that.
Yeah, I mean, we will be fighting all of this. I unfortunately think our chances of being able to defeat a sports ban it's going to be a hard, high bar to meet this year. But we have done it. We have done it in the past. We're not going to concede and give up at day one of the legislative session. Our work has been hard. Frankly, our work has always been hard here in Georgia.
Right.
But what we will be doing and must do is work with trans folks, their parents, the educators that support them, the faith leaders that support them, the businesses that support them, to have this unified message around what lives are. And we started this at Georgia Equality a little over a year ago, encouraging people to set up one-on-one meetings with their elected officials, frankly, at all levels of government, whether they're a Democrat, whether they're a Republican, whether they are an independent, and talk about the reality of what it means to be transgender and really focus on the good things. When you have that loving, supportive family, when you have that loving, supporting community, even if it's your friends. I mean, not everybody has a good relationship with their biological family, but you've got support networks. That this is how you thrive and do well. And these are the opportunities that all trans folks should have. Frankly, these are the opportunities that all kids should have, and including transgender kids. And that's the message we're taking down to the state capitol, that the legislature should be focused on allowing all kids to thrive, including transgender kids, and not be in schoolyard bullies of picking on one kid or one group of kids
1,000%.
And singling them out.
Jeff Graham, Executive Director of Georgia Equality, joining us. I marveled at this yesterday and sort of, zooming back, scanning back and looking at American history. It's always been easier for politicians to find populism in obstructing equality. And we've seen an evisceration, even in the business community, on efforts of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Historically, again, from all of this nation's history, it's been easier for politicians to kowtow to bigotry and exclusion. And it just saddens me that we keep having an elected legislative body at the local, the county, the state, the federal level that finds that low-hanging fruit is the preferred method of going when we should be electing people who are representing us because they're better than us and are leaders on issues like this. And sadly, we're just not finding it enough, particularly outside the Democratic Party. Are there hearts and minds that can be swayed and won over? What sort of interaction do you have with politicians who may not be locked in ideologically, but are at least listening? Do you find that even happening much? Are you able to, for example, sit down and speak with a Greg Dolezal, the Republican from Cumming, who immediately on day one throws down this red meat legislation and even have a conversation with him where he even hears what you're saying?
If I didn't believe that we could change hearts and minds, I couldn't continue to do this job. Right. So yes, I do believe it. It's not easy, but it will happen, and I'm convinced it will happen for a couple different reasons. Transgender folks are not born only into liberal urban families.
That's right.
And there perhaps already are conservative lawmakers that have transgendered loved ones in their lives. And it will be, at some point, I don't know what it's going to be, but there's going to be some bill or some comment or something that will go too far for them, and they'll walk on a vote, or they will talk in a caucus meeting about how this is hurting a loved one. We've seen that again way back decades ago in the fight against AIDS. We saw that in the fight for the freedom to marry. We have seen it happen in the past, and I believe it will happen in the future. But it's going to take people sharing their stories. It's going to take someone having those one-on-one conversations. It's going to take trans voices that embrace this joy and will be, frankly, finding the courage to speak up in these very, very dangerous, difficult times.
My guest this morning is Jeff Graham, Executive Director at Georgia Equality, and we can speak with certainty about gay marriage for now, but it's not a certainty in the very near future either. That's right. Even marriage equality is a threat in the incoming Trump administration. We'll talk with Jeff about that when the Ron Show returns on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn. Second half of today's show, we'll be speaking with Dr. Genevieve Gunther, author of The Language of Climate Politics, also the founding director of End Climate Silence. We're with Jeff Graham, Executive Director at Georgia Equality. And speaking of gay marriage, where we left off, we've actually seen evidence at the federal level where there are people in Congress who are talking about introducing legislation to undo that, though. I mean, we have to stay vigilant even on areas where we've won before.
Absolutely. This is the one thing that I have learned in my decades of work. The work is never done. And the work is never done because there are always people that want to bring us backwards. We're going to be hearing the nominee for Secretary of Defense talk about how women shouldn't be in combat roles in the military. So it's not just members of the LGBT community. We're in a very reactionary period in this country, but frankly, reactionary period around the world. And we could talk about how that happened and when it happened and the cause. But at the end of the day, we know it's happening, and we have to respond to it. And so we do need to continue to teach these lessons to new generations, to fight the fights over and over again, and to fight it, frankly, in a bipartisan manner. Because yes, there are Democrats that have already taken votes to restrict health care to the transgender dependents of military personnel. Right. I fully anticipate that when they vote on a federal ban on transgender kids being able to participate in athletic activities along with their peers, that we will have Democrats in Congress that will support that. I think we're going to probably have Democrats from the Georgia delegation that is usually so strong on LGBT issues that will probably vote for this. And that stuff, it angers me, it frustrates me. But we cannot stop doing the work. We cannot allow that to defeat us.
That's the thing that sort of always angers me, especially with the Democratic Party. It's almost as if sometimes they want to tell us kind of quietly and behind closed doors, listen, in general, I got your back, ... but ... there are political realities and blah, blah, blah. And I understand that in some realms, I talk to progressives all the time who and I consider myself a progressive. I'm a Bernie guy, but like I've seen a lot of Bernie guys and a lot of Bernie people just go completely off the reservation and upset that we're not getting 1,000% of what we want, and we have to accept the 90% sometimes. I get that, but it is frustrating, and it's hard to wrap your mind around. Yeah, I need that Democrat to stay in office versus losing over an issue that clearly they're not on the populist side for. But also, wouldn't it be encouraging, and might bring some new voters out of the woods who see the courage of your conviction, standing up for what you actually believe in instead of cowering in the face of such vitriol in a moment like this?
Well, I actually think that voters do respond to courage. Right. But we will see what happens at the ballot box. And like I said, this is a concern I have. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But even if I am right, we're going to have powerful Democrats in Congress that are standing up and are continuing to fight.
Yeah.
We will have strong leaders in the Democratic Party of Georgia that will continue to work hard to create an inclusive environment for all marginalized communities, including transgender communities and individuals. And so, again, there's going to be tough days ahead. And I hope that folks will take the time to care about themselves and take the time to truly take care of themselves, step back if they need to, but recognize that even in these bad times, they are not friendless. There are people and people in power and people with authority that are actually going to bat for them every single day. And,
it's on that note that we should lift up the fact that we have an openly trans Congresswoman, Sarah McBride, the first ever,
Absolutely.
Who, of course, was the target of vitriol from the likes of Nancy Mace, who used to profess to be pro-LGBTQIA+ back before she decided she wasn't. I guess she found more fertile ground for donors, or I hate to be a cynic like that, but let's focus more on the positive here. We have our first openly trans Congresswoman, and that's no small feat.
That's right. We've had Doraville City Councilwoman Steffi Coons.
Yeah.
She has been a powerhouse. Her example in Doraville has helped propel non-discrimination ordinances. They were city number 2. We're now up to 18. That all happened because of the tenacity of Councilwoman Steffi Coons pushing that issue like no one else had pushed this issue since Kathy Woolard had done it in the 90s in the city of Atlanta. So those voices, those people, they are out there. The trans leaders are out there. The trans folks that showed up in great numbers yesterday are there. We've never had so many trans folks that have come down to the Capitol time and time again, as we did last year. And folks are already starting to show up to do it again in 2025.
Well, here's hoping that at some point in time, that show of support can bolster the stoicism of those on the left who may be wavering a little bit, and God forbid, maybe soften some hearts on the right. You just never know. I personally am a little heartened by seeing that House Speaker John Burns is drawing a line. It's not a win, but it's not nearly the loss it could be.
And he has indicated that, sports, I was at the Eggs and Issues breakfast this morning, and he brought it up. So it is a priority. But if he's also indicated that this may be the only thing that he wants to consider. Right. Yeah. And if we can protect people's health care, if we can protect people's ability to have their identity affirmed, as they go about their day-to-day life, in other aspects of life, that is a good thing. If we can keep those other things protected and respected.
Jeff Graham, Executive Director at Georgia Equality. Fantastic work again by your organization, and I know you guys will keep the fires lit through 2025 and beyond. Thank you so much for joining the Ron Show today.
Thanks, Ron. Yeah, absolutely. Take care. Bye-bye.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is the Ron Show on America One Radio.
Let me start with a little bit of some of Jon Stewart Monday night on The Daily Show, speaking to the GOP looking to constrain relief efforts for wildfires in California that they believe the effect of liberal policies.
Republicans appear to want to attach their "I told you so's" as a condition of funding California's disaster relief.
I expect that there will be strings attached to money that is ultimately approved.
I think there should probably be conditions on that, Dave. That's my personal view.
Before we put funds into place, we've got to find out exactly how we're going to hold these leaders accountable and what sort of policy changes are required.
There can't be a blank check on this.
They don't deserve anything, to be honest with you, unless they show us they're going to make some changes.
What the is wrong with you?
Thank you.
Really, Senator from Alabama? The state near the bottom in math, reading, and test scores. Next time you get hit by a hurricane, why don't we have a little parent-teacher conference to see that if you got your scores up, you would get the money. Or actually, let's not do it, because you'll get the money anyway, because we're not psychos. That is psychotic. There's something wrong with you. And you know what? And here's the thing. I can do the Daily Show thing. I can run down all the congresspeople and senators on the right calling for conditions on disaster aid that absolutely had the opposite view when it was their state on the line.
We need to do everything we can. We have citizens that are literally going to get worse by the day.
Shut the up. Because I can do it, but it doesn't even matter. I'm not even going to do it. Because red states are always the tragic victims of circumstance outside of their control. And Democrats always vote for their aid. Whereas blue state disasters are a function of their flawed morality and policy. And if we help blue state survivors, well, what message will that send? What lesson will they learn? But fine. If strings must be attached, what be the strings?
The problem with California is forestry management.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I didn't. It's true. The management of the forest. You have to rake the leaves and shut down the illegal elf tree cookie factory. I understand. And what a great, utterly anodyne suggestion. I mean, what forest couldn't be managed better? I mean, if you've been to a forest lately, chaos. It's chaos. It's the dirt and leaves and what is that? Bear shit, I'm sure. I want to see the manager. Okay, so we get the money if we have better forest management. Everybody then gets food and clothes. What else?
They've not done the necessary work to make sure there's fresh water flowing into key areas.
Water. Yeah, no question. No question. Water for the fire. I'm going to get that message to the firefighters. Toot sweet. Water is so important. Water is a terrific fire. I don't even want to say the R word. But as I always say, what do you got there, mister? A fire? Nothing like water. Water works on all kinds of fire, except for one kind of fire, but I don't know which one that is. But odds are with you. Point taken. But forest management and get some water up here, and then your children may have blankets. These are all great pointers on how to mitigate fires, and I'm sure California has absolutely been trying. Water and forest management, maybe not good enough, but they have it.
So That's all fun and well. Jon Stewart and The Daily Show doing their good work to make us laugh when there are moments that should have us in tears and in the fetal position and crying and kind of rocking back and forth, wondering what our future holds. Joining me, Dr. Genevieve Gunther, The Language of Climate Politics author and a past guest. How are you today?
Well, I'm struggling. My heart is breaking for people in California who have lost their homes, who don't know where they're going to be living. I'm really afraid that lots of people are going to end up homeless out of this. And, landlords are already jacking up rents. And it's just a terrible scene. And the fires haven't even ended yet.
No.
There's, a map that shows fire weather that goes from north of Santa Barbara all the way down through San Diego. This is like, millions and millions of people, 10 million people who are faced with life-threatening wildfires today.
Factually, not even to the Mexican border, but likely beyond it, but because, we'll worry about what happens. And by the way, Mexican firefighters showing up to help. I'm sure Biden's open border policy had something to do with that. Something you tweeted actually caught my eye in that you mentioned homelessness, and there are laws in place that prevent people from living in their cars that sort of need to be amended, at least temporarily, so that people can ... live in their cars while this is going on. I just find something about that so totally ironic.
No, it's a form of tragic irony. The California Supreme Court this past summer gave cities the right to criminalize sleeping in tents.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of cities started passing ordinances to criminalize sleeping in tents. And, people are going to need to set up tents. They're going to need to be tent cities for a while until things are rebuilt. This has happened in California before. The Paradise Fire led to a lot of shifting around, and a lot of people who couldn't afford rents in the tighter housing market ended up homeless. And so, that's part of what's happening in blue states. It's not simply bad management on the part of Democratic mayors and governors. It's also climate change and the fact that people don't have enough money to start over after everything they own has been destroyed. So it's going to be really tragic to watch that play out. And one of the things I have on my list of things to do today, as a matter of fact, is to try to figure out which organizations are aiding people who have been made homeless by climate change and, trying to get some fundraising money flowing their way.
Dr. Genevieve, our guest here, is the founding director of End Climate Silence, also the author of the book, The Language of Climate Politics. And I find that you are someone that is worthy of speaking to today because this very event has been politicized. I thought the Hurricane Helene response was going to be the apex, oh my God, they've hyper-partisanized this. But the California wildfires seems to have taken that up a notch. We're more focused now on what a black female mayor in Los Angeles isn't doing right, or what Gavin Newsom, a potential 2028 presidential candidate, isn't doing right or hasn't done right. And I almost feel like they're damned if they do, damned if they don't. Californians politically get the bad rap for being over-legislated and policied to death and, burdensome regulations. And it's because of this very thing that California has so many quote-unquote burdensome regulations on things like fuel efficiency and development now. Pre-1990, that wasn't so much a thing, but there's a reason why it's so expensive to live in California, why California taxes are higher, and it's got a lot to do with the fact that California has to deal with an exponential amount of the effects of climate change that they're not as culpable for, but are attached to the rest of the nation that is.
That was very well said.
And really, I just really pulled that out of my rectum, just like off the top of my head. I'm so proud of myself.
Well done, sir, because that was very, very clear and it got right to the point. I just want to add, though, that, a lot of this rhetoric about Los Angeles' mayor and Gavin Newsom is not sort of pointing out things that they did wrong legitimately. A lot of it is just pure up disinformation that is circulating lies in order to create false beliefs about these people being incompetent, and also to suggest that there is something that you can do when wildfire, even if it's caused by arson, ignites in a statewide tinderbox and is coupled with Santa Ana winds that are over 100 miles an hour. There is no amount of water in the California system, really in any system, that's going to be able to put out wildfires across an entire region of a major urban area in a 100 mile per hour Santa Ana wind event. I mean, if you see some of the videos,
it's dystopian.
It's terrifying. There's one particular video of a McDonald's on fire, and the McDonald's sign and the golden arches and a palm tree next to it. And it's, the embers, the sparks, the flames are just going horizontally to the right because the wind is blowing so forcefully. And so, there's a picture that's been circulated of an empty reservoir that had been drained because it was being repaired, and the repairs were taking longer than they had anticipated. But the water in the fire hydrants doesn't come from drinking reservoirs.
Right.
So, it has one thing has nothing to do with another.
Yeah.
So most of the lies are manufactured disinformation that President Trump, incoming President Trump, has been circulating in order to try to create anger and hostility towards Democratic politicians, but also to drive our attention away from the real cause, or at least the real context for this fire, which is, as you said, climate change. And they are denying that climate change is real, that it's even happening, in order to double down on policies which are going to make the phenomenon so much worse in the coming decades. And, I think that it's really up to the news media and also to the Democrats to express maybe a little bit more outrage about this. Because could you imagine if Joe Biden had said anything akin to what Trump is saying about Newsom and the LA mayor when Helene hit North Carolina? Could you imagine if he had blamed local responders who were desperately trying to help people survive and to preserve people's homes? I mean, it's disgusting, essentially.
Yeah.
And I really wish that there was as much disgust over the way that Trump and his minions are politicizing this enormous tragedy in order literally to keep being the villains who are making these things worse. Because what we're seeing now is just going to keep getting worse until we phase out coal, oil, and gas and stop putting greenhouse gases into our atmosphere.
The dichotomy between this wildfire in its infancy and Donald Trump giving speeches from Mar-a-Lago talking about drill baby drill and doing more of that. And let's be honest, Joe Biden is the president of the country in an era where we've done more drill baby drilling domestically than ever before in the nation's history. It's not exactly like his hands aren't completely clean on this, although you can at least capitulate and say, yes, but also the Green New Deal, the infrastructure investment, and et cetera and so on, the green energy initiatives that
right.
he began. So at least he's trying to diversify the energy grid in some way to try and guide us into this new future. I want to speak a little bit towards some of the recent talk in Washington about adding conditions to disaster relief, because I find this to be kind of disgusting too. And I know Abby Phillip on Newsnight pushed back when Scott Jennings trumpeted that idea of adding conditions to change in policy. Like, I don't even know what change in policy California could enact that would help. Abby correctly asked, well, would you be okay with these conditions if after a hurricane hits Florida, Democrats in the House wanted to add conditions about limiting development along the coast?
If the Democratic-controlled House decided, you know what, in Florida, they really should not be building those houses on the water.
Right.
Climate change is happening. That aid that we give you is going to be conditional upon you preventing the building of anything along in all those areas that are prone to hurricanes. You would be okay with that?
If you could pass that through the United States Congress, more power to you.
I'm just asking.
Hold on. I'm the lawyer here. We have rules like that all the time. Yeah. You have to build Coney Island in Brooklyn. If you're going to build something, it's got to be built in a certain way. So you're going to get the money. It's got to be built so it's
Arthur, thank you. So Arthur is pointing out that is very much something that Congress could do. Would you be okay with that?
I am not for a blank check to a state that has clearly failed and doesn't know how to manage fires. I would like to see a partnership between the state and Washington so that whatever money is being spent, look, I don't live in California.
So now we're talking about a partnership.
But if
didn't exactly have a precise response to that because, again, putting the shoe on the other foot doesn't make them comfortable in any way.
Well, Well, also, no democratic federal administration would put conditions on disaster relief, okay? Because in a moment of I don't want to say a natural disaster, because this was absolutely it is an unnatural disaster, which is being exacerbated by human-caused climate change. And although we are part of nature, this is not something that is out of our control. This is something we created, and it needs to be acknowledged as such. But within that frame, Democrats would never put conditions on aid to fellow Americans. Mm-hmm. At this moment, we need to come together as one nation and help our fellow citizens in need. To put conditions on federal aid is to act like a mob boss who is literally using someone else's vulnerability and your position of power to essentially twist their arm to get them to do what you want to do. This is not how a leader behaves. This is how a mob boss behaves.
Well, look who leads that party. I liken him to a mob boss. Donald Trump is, in many ways, a mob boss.
He is, and the Republicans have become his hitmen and women.
Spot on. We're with Dr. Genevieve Gunther, the author of The Language of Climate Politics, founding director of End Climate Silence. More with our conversation when The Ron Show returns on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn. Final few minutes of The Ron Show, and I will make sure I give you a non-Jeff Bezos link so that you can purchase Genevieve Gunther's book, The Language of Climate Politics, and the link to the organization End Climate Silence. And Dr. Gunther, thank you so much for joining me in this long conversation today. Critics on the right of California's efforts at maintenance, forestation control, or maintenance of some sort of raking the leaves, I guess. It's something that I think deserves some conversation as well, because it's not necessarily untrue that there's a lot of upkeep that needs to be done because of the effects of climate change. They leave that part out. But also that California only owns like 3% of the forest land in its own state. The federal government owns the other 40%. And that the federal government has been underfunding California in those efforts for so many years anyway. Never mind the fact that California, one of the blue states that gives more to the federal government than it gets back, while some of the red states that are being represented by these folks that want to add conditions. It's just, the irony to me is just so rich.
Right. This is the other thing that's really, really important to understand about these fires. A lot of people think that being rich is going to protect you from climate change.
Well,
right. And the Palisades community that burned down is one of the most affluent communities in the United States. Mm-hmm. Okay. Money is not more powerful than the planet. The planet is more powerful than money. And as soon as we understand that, I think we're going to have a lot more chance of surviving this climate change phenomenon. But the other thing is that it shows is that, the limits of adaptation are real, right? The only way you are going to prevent the kind of situation that we saw, which is not just about like a forest igniting and then lighting a fire in the houses that are built on the perimeter of that forest. This was about these winds picking up embers, picking up flames, picking up sparks from fires and blowing them into urban areas. So the reason there was so much tinder is that California is experiencing something called hydrological whiplash, whereby some years there are these deluges, these extreme precipitation events, which, creates flooding and other horrible and costly damages, but also sort of encourages a lot of underbrush growth and flowering and leafing where perhaps there had been sort of less growth before. Mm-hmm. And then we had that in 2022 and 2023. And then in 2024, the drought that had been, oppressing California for nearly a decade returned in full force, and all of that vegetation just dried out. Mm-hmm. So the only way you're going to prevent conflagrations in that vegetation that get picked up by winds and deposited in urban areas is if you basically cut everything down across the state.
And what's funny is the Washington Post actually cited some of the reasons for this and said that essentially the fact that people are allowed to have any vegetation in their yards where they shouldn't have had homes built in the first place exacerbates this problem. Like they literally suggested, well, maybe you just shouldn't have bushes or trees in your yards.
That's right. And they should just sort of, cover everything with concrete, right?
Right.
But so
we're heading for that. I mean, we have to be heading for that.
Yeah. Right? But is that an adaptation that we really want to live with? Is that how people want to live? So we think that, human ingenuity is going to allow us to adapt to climate change. And so it's fine. Sure. But in this case, that would mean covering all of Los Angeles in concrete and having no trees, no grass, no bushes, no nothing. Is that what you were imagining when you said that we could adapt to climate change? I don't think so.
Yeah, that's a pretty dystopian look as well, no doubt about it. Dr. Genevieve Gunther, the author of The Language of Climate Politics, and the founding director of End Climate Silence. Thank you so much for joining me today. Is there any optimism to be had? We've all had our chance to kind of mire ourselves in the reality of the November elections, but talk to me about what we do going forward.
Well, look, I think that there is going to be backlash because these unnatural disasters are just going to keep happening. They're going to come faster. They're going to be more extreme. And, the vast majority of Americans actually do understand that climate change is real and human caused. And the vast majority of Americans are actually concerned about it. It's not their priority yet, but they are concerned about it.
Do you fear that there's a sense of fatalism? Like there's nothing that we can do?
100%. But the important thing to realize is that fatalism comes from our belief, our false belief that our politics are inadequate to the crisis. There's not that much one individual can do to reduce his or her carbon footprint. And even if they did, that's just one individual.
Right.
And we look at the election of Trump or we look at the political system and we think, well, how to solve this? But that's simply because we haven't solved it yet. We are still a democracy in this country. We do still have the capacity to talk to our neighbors, to organize, to go on strike, to demand change in our homes, our businesses, our churches, our synagogues, our mosques, our local, state, and even eventually our federal governments. It's don't feel depressed. We haven't actually tried yet. And I am 100% sure that once people really wake up and realize that this is not a problem for quote unquote future generations, this is not something we can just adapt out of. This is something that's happening now. It's affecting our children. It's just going to get worse until we create the next economy, until we create the future. I'm 100% sure that people are going to come out of this and fight for life because that's what people do.
Man, I hope you're right. I thought that there might be some changed minds after Hurricane Katrina. I thought there might be some changed minds after these 100-year rain events in Texas and in South Carolina. I thought there might be some changed minds after Milton or Helene. I thought there might be some changed minds after the wildfires that we were experiencing, not just, by the way, in California, but states like Idaho and Montana that have been dealing with larger geographic wildfires that just didn't affect as many people because there's not as much population. You're more optimistic than I am because I've been thinking this is going to change minds for more than 20 years.
If you look at the election map, there was a blue shift in the track of Helene. There was. Everything else shifted red. There was a blue shift in that track. And there are people for the first time trying to organize the survivors of extreme weather events to aid them, but also to organize them as a political force. I know this feels like it's been going on for a long time and that we've just lost the battle, but I'm telling you, the battle hasn't even begun yet.
I love that. Dr. Genevieve Gunther, the author of The Language of Climate Politics, founding director of End Climate Silence. Thank you so much for that positivity. I needed that and for joining the Ron Show today.
You're welcome, Ron. Great to talk to you.
You know the drill. Show notes, as always, at ronshowatl.com. We replay 5 p.m. America One Radio, 11 p.m. Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. Back tomorrow at 9 a.m. See you then.